Brandon, super excited to have the chance to sit down and chat with you. You have a very busy schedule, so I appreciate you taking some time. Wanted to dive right in and just kind of go back to how we first met and then dig into the origins of what you've created with the Anix. But man, it's been, I think, 6 years ago when we first connected, 2018. And I heard a track off of your last album with Cleopatra. Um, Heard it on my Spotify discovery mode. Immediately was like, what is this? How have I not heard of this? This is awesome. And then we were looking for a remixer for Circle of Dust, I believe was the first thing we reached out. And then here we are 6 years later and like 5 albums in and lots of collabs and remixes and fun stuff. But yeah, what, from your perspective, can you frame up what was going on in 2018? Kind of where were you musically and where the Anix had kind of come from? And then what changed in 2018 to kind of what's happened over the last 5, 6 years?
It was interesting because 2018 was kind of the end of the road, at least where I felt things could go. And up until that point, I only knew one route to go in the music business, which was record a full album, put it out, play shows, tour, exhaust yourself out, burn yourself out, and then try to survive all that and then start over again. So I'd been doing that since really I started the project. And when you reached out, the album I put out at that point was called Ephemeral, which was a more electronic based thing. And it was like, at that point, nothing seemed to move the needle. So I was just like, I don't know what to do at this point. But yeah, it's pretty incredible what the power of knowing someone believes in you, what that can do to your motivation. Because I think that was the most significant thing that happened in that change was someone I respected, which was you and Clayton, saw the belief, saw the vision, and that ignited a whole new like chapter of the brand.
Yeah.
So that was pretty amazing to experience that.
Yeah, you have been an inspiration to us with just your creative output over these past 5 or 6 years. And not without its bumps in the road, and there's always challenges and the way things change on social media platforms and streaming platforms. And we've been through a lot in just 5 or 6 years here, but you've been an inspiration to us just with your creative output. And yeah, we believed in your music and still believe that there's a huge audience that hasn't even discovered it yet that we want to connect it with. But let's go a step further back, to kind of the origins of the Anix. I mean, originally you had a band, and yeah, you were doing touring. You did a whole, you being a live band member in another project with Apoptygma Berserk, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, what was it like in the early days? Like, you know, even recording albums and writing music, how would you contrast what you're doing currently to like where it came from?
So I always had electronic instruments in the house growing up, drum machines and synthesizers that my dad had. So that was my first intro into music. Was there's guitars laying around, there's a drum machine, there's a keyboard. I don't know how to use any of it. So let's just play around. And then I had when my sister was born, she had this little toy recorder, and that's how I started layering different melodies on top of each other. Just totally reckless, no ambition or anything, just for fun. And that kind of started it. And then, growing up in high school bands and, all that stuff, played the talent show, all the cliche things. But when you're growing up, everyone in like the scene I was in, it was only cool to be like a punk band, a metal band, in that time period, like Deftones were super in, Corn, like all those bands. This was like
Yeah.
late 90s. So the stuff that, I did like that music, but playing in those bands quickly, I saw a space that this could evolve into, but you couldn't find anyone that wanted to do it. Like the thought of a synthesizer in a band in that era was so like taboo and frowned upon and, weak looking. So I just had to start doing it on my own and learning how to figure all the stuff out. So then I started a new band right when I was ending high school with another singer. It was basically me doing all the music. So this was the start of the Anix before the name. We
Okay.
had another singer, and we did some label showcases for like Virgin and Universal. And the feedback from those labels was, you should be the singer. They pulled me aside and said, we're not going to sign the project. We think you need to do it. You need to be the singer. And I've never sang a word in my life. So that was, a tough decision because we invested so much in this first band, and then to be told that. So it was back to the drawing board. Started trying to figure out how to, I had zero training, nothing, and yeah, it was just a lot of learning experience throughout that. I think the whole time I had a somewhat of a visual aspect to the band, which helped it stand apart from the traditional like garage band you would see. And that captured labels' attentions and producers and all these bigger entities to pay attention. That led into doing some hired gun guitar work. So some producers started seeing the project, but then pulling me aside and hiring me for their project as like a touring guitarist, or be in this music video, or label showcases or radio tour showcases. So like Wind Up Records was a big one that I did some stuff on, some stuff with Sony, and yeah, it was my my first exposure to the big professional world of music was through those avenues, touring to support like the Fantastic Four movie and some of the Marvel movies where they had an artist that had a song on it. So we would do these radio tours to support that. Then we would do these big festivals with like My Chemical Romance, 30 Seconds to Mars. So, experience on big stages, big production. And I was kind of managing the band portion for these artists, putting together backing tracks, hiring people. So I was, getting my friends involved from Dead Z and, um, you know, things like that. So it
Yeah.
was pretty fun. And then that led into, I would learn all that stuff from working with them, work with the producers, learn more, come back, apply it to my own production, work with the producers more now on the Annex stuff. And it's kind of this zigzag road, working with some big producers that did like Evanescence and like Marilyn Manson, John Five, Rob Zombie, demoing potential new Annex stuff. But everyone had their own vision of it, of what it should be.
Yeah.
And they wanted it to be, it was a number of things. It was some wanted to turn into a punk project, some wanted it to be a metal project. Some were wanting to turn it into a pop thing. So I worked with this producer, Jimmy Harry, who's a huge like pop producer that did like Britney Spears and Madonna and like Fisher Spooner. And he wanted me to just be the singer. We worked on the music together, but it was his music. And it was kind of like this pop version of Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah.
So it's this pretty dense labyrinth of zigzagging between the Annex, going on tour with other artists, meeting producers, working with them, applying it back to my own stuff, and then Apoptigma Berserk happened,
Yeah.
and then toured as the Annex, opening for them all throughout Europe. Again, big, massive tour, and then became good friends with them, and then became their guitar player. So started touring with them, worldwide tours, big, massive tours on bigger concerts, like 20,000 seater venues, stadiums, arenas, festivals. And then, yeah, it was all just kind of building this arsenal of weapons to use however you wanted. So I learned a lot of marketing, branding, merchandise, tour management, kind of the whole, spectrum of things through that.
And would you say you learned a lot of things that you could apply directly to what you were doing, but you also saw and learned a lot of things that of what not to do as well,
Hmm.
right? The things
Oh
that you're like, okay, I don't want to be this and I don't
yeah.
want to do that.
Yeah. What I saw a lot of just throughout this entire time period was artists that had everything I wish I had. So they had these big deals, tour managers, agents, putting together tours, but just the unwillingness to work and do to do what's being served to them on a silver platter. So that was always so strange. It's like, they have the dream right in front of them, but they're just pushing back against every aspect of it. Also, the amount that they relied on other people to do things, which slowed this process down so much because you had to get this person involved for photos, this person for editing, this manager for scheduling a studio, then an engineer, like all these moving pieces to this gigantic puzzle seemed impossible. So as I'm going through this, being exposed to all of it, I'm learning how to do all this. And, that's how I learned to do things as a one person production company, basically, because I saw how slow and what it does if you rely on everyone for everything else. So that's, yeah, where it came from.
Where in the process of kind of the musical career, or how does your interest in design and like art, you do a lot of, or pretty much all of your own graphic design. Speaking of being a one-man studio, a lot of your own video work. But where kind of in your career arc did design come in to be like a key component of your interests and how you incorporated that into the Anix?
Um, it was really there from the very start. Um, I wanted to be a designer when I was in high school, a car designer or a shoe designer. So my life was always about art growing up. Before music, it was entirely art driven. And then the first band that I saw that applied a real visual identity was Orgy. Because up until that point, you bands had something going, like The Cure had a goth look, um, which resonated with me big time because of the Crow movie. They kind of felt like they're from the
Yeah.
same world. And then a lot of the bands after that, like all these punk bands and pop punk bands, nobody had like a real look. It just looked like kids in high school, and which was cool for, that was popular. That's what everyone liked. But it wasn't until like Orgy came along and I was like, oh, this is like a movie. They're like applying the methodology of you're making a movie, but to a band with costumes and worlds and certain colors that are carried across. So that was a big eye-opening experience. Also, Deadsy had this very distinct theme. So it yeah, that was kind of the turning point of how important the visual identity is for a band or a project.
You still keep up with, a lot of visual brands, cool, tech wear, just very, very visually aesthetic projects that you're interested in, that you follow, that you work on. I mean, your Instagram is very curated in a design sense. Like you can tell you have a theme to certain types of things you like. Um, are there any designers specifically by name or design studios that have been, or movies, TV, like, are there inspirations and influences on the art side that you would cite?
uh, yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff I like comes from the 1960s, actually. Like back then, it was a really experimental time for the US with everything happening going to space, the moon project, all that. So it was everything had this like space age looking twist to it, which I thought was for that time so radical compared to the normal businessman in a suit and tie. And then you see this, all this technology shifting. So things like the Bauhaus school, the stuff that came out of that, the Eames furniture and the colors that they used for that, just kind of like these very basic primary shapes and colors that came from that time period, which I still really like now. Um, and then, of course, like everyone, Star Wars, and then the Blade Runner, 2001 Space Odyssey. That's kind of the world that shapes a lot of the stuff I like. 2001 Space Odyssey, it's like the perfect example of primary colors, minimalistic, retro futurish kind of looking. But is in terms of like modern designers, Ash Thorpe, he's a huge influence and a friend. He's done a lot of stuff for Nike and all these, amazing car brands and stuff. Um, and then the clothing side of things, that's another enormous inspiration. So
Yeah.
like a lot of the Japanese brands, Sakai, Undercover, and then Errolson from Acronym, and then Dior, Saint Laurent, that kind of stuff, Prada. It's all an inspiration. It all creates kind of the same world for
Yeah.
me.
If you had to name, like 3 brands that you're just, you know, a fan of all of the design work they do, whether that's Nike or a design brand, what would 3 brands that you might first come to mind with?
Wow. Um, Acronym for sure, since that's a part of daily life, everything I wear. um, Rimowa is another one I really like, the aluminum suitcase company, just because it's such a strict design DNA and identity that they're able to make a whole, multiple decades worth of business out of. And some of the more experimental stuff Nike's done and Adidas, and recently Asics and Salomon a lot of the shoe companies and fashion brands are the ones that are really innovating and doing the interesting stuff. So,
Cool.
yeah.
You have also done brand collaborations with, like Dispatch. Um, where did the relationship with Dispatch and kind of, for those that don't know about, the guitar strap and the belts and things that you've done with them, um, I'd love to hear you expand a little bit, kind of from behind the scenes, how those came to fruition, or what the process was like collaborating on, a reinvented guitar strap.
Yeah, so Dispatch was the first camera strap I ever bought was a Dispatch strap, and I bought it in like a streetwear store, a long time, probably like 2008, somewhere around there.
Sure.
And I really bought it just because how cool it looked, and that was my first introduction to that company. When I was looking to do a guitar strap, I originally was talking to a couple other brands, bigger brands, and showing some drawings and some sketches, because it really was, if you go into Guitar Center, you look at all the straps, everything is kind of like, looks like a Harley Davidson version of a strap or just the basic nylon. Everything is pretty much the same, and it really hasn't changed in, you know, God, 70 years or so. So I just thought, there's got to be room to innovate in that space. So right when I was pitching this out to other companies, Dispatch actually DM'd me, and they said, "Hey, are you interested in something about a guitar strap?" And I was like, "That's what are the odds of that?" It's really bizarre that would align right in the same like couple weeks where I was pitching out my original sketches. So originally they wanted me to kind of test a design they were working on, and then I guess I didn't fully understand what they were asking, so I took that as design, you know, design your own. So I was like, hell yeah, I'm in. Started designing sketches, and then I saw what they were doing and doing like a more modified version of that, and that's kind of how it started. And then that led into it was very successful when we launched it. We did some cool marketing pieces for it, and then that led into a version of the guitar strap, but as a belt, because obviously not everyone has a guitar, but a belt is something almost everyone needs. So again, it's a pretty specific product because it's really futuristic and like super over engineered, and they're expensive to make. They take a long time to make just one of them. But it was, it got attention everywhere. It's like on Hypebeast and Uncrate and all the cool sites that I'm looking at daily. It was on
Yeah.
those sites, so that was awesome to see.
You also were involved in a product development collab with a laptop.
Mhm.
Maybe you can expand on what that was and kind of what your involvement was.
Actually, I have it. Let me grab it.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen this in person.
So it was a collaboration through ASUS and Acronym. So they had done a laptop first a few years ago called the RMT-01, and this is the follow up using I guess the most powerful gaming tablet ever created. So the Acronym version of that was pulling together like a skunkworks team of very specialized people for every component of it. So for the basically the aluminum chassis, they brought in Phil, who's Phil Saunders from the original team that designed the Iron Man suit from the original movie. He's worked on Tron and a number of Marvel and super cool things. And then they brought Raf Rennie, who's the graphic designer that did all the technical graphics everywhere. And then Errolson was the kind of director of the whole project on the Acronym side. And then Rod Chong, who also oversaw kind of the whole project in the US. And then they brought me on for the strap system based on what they saw me do with Dispatch, with the guitar straps and belts and all that. So it was a really interesting project because there was a distinct problem to solve with it, which was they wanted this device to be able to be carried in a number of different scenarios. So like if you're out in the field shooting a movie and you need to run with this device on, or carry it to a coffee shop to work, or or on the subway or whatever the case is, or on a bike, they wanted one strap that can do all of that. So it was a lot of thinking of angles, and it was kind of like an origami project, thinking of how can you fold this strap in certain ways so it deploys and does all these things, because one strap needed to convert into like four different ways: into a briefcase handle, a fold down in front of your chest mode, over the shoulder, and also be removable. So we were looking at like how do astronauts in space strap themselves down to exercise, like on a treadmill.
Yeah.
I was looking at like rock climbing harnesses, parachute harnesses, all that stuff to get ideas. And yeah, it was pushed me way outside my comfort zone. And working with Acronym, the phrase I heard the most was, because I would submit drawings and ideas, and every time he'd say, "Just we need a prototype, just build it." So I was constantly building all these different iterations and testing it in real life. So yes, it was amazing.
What is the difference when you're working with something tactile and physical, like a physical product versus, so much of the art and music ends up being in a digital medium? I mean, you're playing instruments, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are some differences when you think about like working with a physical medium versus something that ends up digital. Does that, do you think about those in different ways at all?
It's it all comes from like the same part of the brain, I think, where you're trying to solve a problem. With music, it's the same thing. You're trying to stitch all these different elements together, and there's a tremendous amount of problem solving with music, and both are exhausting. One in a physical way, and music is mentally exhausting because you're just sitting in front of a computer. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the problem solving part of it is you know that there's a solution out there to all these things. And with music, it's like if you come up with the right solution, you could have a song that can change your life. That's probably the most inspiring part about music is that
Yeah.
it's in you. Technically, it's in your hands. You could change your life if you just solve the problem a certain way. And I guess it's kind of the same thing building a product too, or merchandise or guitar straps or whatever. If you solve that problem the right way, it could catapult you into someplace you've never been.
Yeah. When you're making music, are you drawing inspiration from that design and some of the brands and products that you love? Like, is there a tie line there between those things driving some of your music or your sound, or like images you have in your head while you're creating music?
Yeah, because I don't really listen to music outside of making it. So anytime I'm the only time I really listen to music is when I'm producing it. And then outside of that, the last thing I want to do is listen to more music. Generally, there are some scenarios outside of that, but I don't listen to a lot of music. Um, so yeah, I think the stuff that I'm passionate about, so like style, fashion, clothes, movies, that's the stuff that just gets me in the right headspace to actually want to create. So that's the biggest hurdle for any creator is the getting over that initial step of going into the studio, turn everything on, and just start. But you have to be in a certain headspace to do that, or you train yourself to understand you're not always going to want to go in there and start. But that's part of the process is being aware that you have that initial speed bump to get over. But once you start, it all starts happening with all the stuff I'm into, shoes, clothes, gear, tech. That stuff gets me into more of an excited mental space where I actually want to be open about creating things. So I guess that's in one strange way how it inspires me.
Totally. Um, yeah, kind of a few directions to go from there. What would be, something that you're currently excited about, whether any project that you're involved with or working on, is there something that you're currently working on, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, so I launched this sub brand called Distortion Dynamics, which is kind of my it's the umbrella for everything I do. So it could be design, video production, graphic design, photography, merchandise, all that stuff lives under that umbrella. So I've done one launch so far that went really well, and I'm doing the second one now. But I'm looking forward to the third or fourth launch where I can actually do some more um, fully custom pieces. So just baby steps. You have to do one, sell enough to make it make sense to get to the next stage. So I'm kind of in the middle part of where I want to be with that to actually get to the more experimental stuff. So excited about that. And also, there's a few projects that I'm on that I can't say what they are yet, but they're basically helping on the design side for some pretty cool collaborations. So
Awesome. Where does social media lay for you in terms of, you know, a place that you are excited about and interacting with fans and seeing the reactions, getting that feedback of people like to your art and your music, versus the challenges of social media of keeping, keeping up with all these different platforms and the algorithms changing. Um, how do you think about that?
uh, it's it's so painful. um, a few years ago is a different story. When you put all this effort in and you see at least that it's reaching the people that are following you, that makes it worth it, regardless of the outcome, regardless of if people are clicking and buying your merch or listening to the song. at least knowing that the effort is getting to the people you're trying to present it to. That was one thing. That's changed so much over the last 1 to 2 years that it's really just deflating to put any effort into it. That's obviously a part of being a musician. You have to put the effort in, and you have to interact in all these different ways outside of just the music. But it's one of the most painful parts, I think, of being a musician, is relying on these third party platforms for your career and for the success of your single. There's so much that's out of your control in the music industry.
Yeah.
Relying on editors to put the songs on playlists and relying on these algorithms to serve your content to the right people, or whatever the case is. It's really challenging to stay positive about it all. So it always comes back to you should only be doing this stuff if you just enjoy the process of doing it, not looking at the final outcome of what that can be or what you think it can be. As soon as you start thinking of that, of having these expectations, it's downhill fast from that point.
Yeah.
So I always have to try to reset and just think, I should just be doing this simply for my own well-being of wanting to create. Anything else outside of that happens is just a benefit, but I always try to not think of that stuff.
Yeah, I think there is, two very different schools of thought of like you just making good art that you want to make for you, and then sharing it with the world and letting it do what it's going to do, find its audience, or the artists that create and cater to an audience. And you can be successful both ways, and there's pros and cons to it. But I know some artists, there's the authenticity side of, and not to say that some artists can't be very successful catering to what other people want, but at least at FiXT and a lot of the artists we work with, including you, it seems like it's most of the artists we work with, it's more important that they're being authentic to what they believe in and finding the audience for it versus trying to manufacture something for a potential audience.
Yeah. There's definitely certain personality types that can do that well, where they're creating for the audience and they know how to do that. Like Daedric, for example, they kill it doing that, and they're massively successful doing it that way. Then there's other artists like me who don't even, if it were up to me, I would never show any visual picture of who I am. It would just be a blank silhouette. But it's hard to find the balance of how out of the picture you can be and still be successful. Yeah. I don't have the answer to it. I'm still trying to figure it out, but it's hard. It's a work in progress.
Let's talk about music production a little bit. I mean, you play multiple instruments. You've got physical gear, guitars, bass, keyboards, synths, but you're also digital, doing a lot of software-based stuff. From a music production standpoint, like, and you touched on this a little bit with growing up and playing with some stuff, and that your dad had gear, but self-taught, like, are you just teaching your stuff when you find a new instrument, you're figuring out how to make it work for you, and do you have any kind of creative process of when you're thinking about music production, how you're thinking about what instruments you're using, what software, and how you create?
Yeah. All of it was, everything I've done has been self-taught. So when I first got into it, the internet wasn't the resource it is now. So you really had to just experiment to find ways to make things work. So you're referencing, these huge budget $1 million production albums. And you have this gear in front of you, and you're going back and forth saying, how can I make all this noise sound like that? Without the resource of the internet, without the resource of like YouTube to look up tutorials. So you have a giant manual, and you have this reference track and all this gear. So I think that helped a lot for me because you learn so many wrong things along that process because you don't know where you're going. But in the out of bounds areas, the wrong areas, you also learn a lot of cool stuff that you wouldn't
Yeah.
naturally learn if you just took this straight path from zero to, here's the end results and I'm going after. So I think that's one thing that may be lacking now is it's so easy to just watch a video and find the answer to go from zero to whatever you're trying to accomplish without going in the out of bounds areas and making all these mistakes. Because it's usually, in any case, in any industry, that's where the innovation and the cool stuff happens, is in the wrong, you know,
Yeah. Those
areas.
happy accidents.
Exactly. Yep.
Mm. Um, what about in terms of, DAWs and software tools? Are you kind of beholden to certain software, certain things that are part of your toolkit?
I've used Logic for as long as I can remember now. And it's not to say it's the best. Apple products constantly crash. Every I have the newest MacBook Pro, always crashes. All the native Apple software always fails. Logic's the same case. So I'm sure there's better, you know, DAWs out there that are more reliable. It's what I know, so I just stick with it. I feel like I've anything I can imagine I can do within it. So I haven't had a reason to go outside of that to accomplish a sound. So if I got to that point where I felt like I maxed out the potential of Logic, then I would look elsewhere. But so far, I haven't got to that point.
One time, I think several years ago, I heard you talk about uh, an idea of for you to be able to capture inspiration, you needed your setup to be almost instantly available to be creative. And
Yeah.
I think, and I don't know if you still operate that way, but I'd be curious for you kind of uh, expand on that or share your philosophy for other artists about how they might be able to incorporate some of that in being productive.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing for me before I had a real studio built out. When you had to, take things out of closets, amps, and wire things up, take guitars out of cases, find outlets to plug things into. You could spend, 2 hours just setting up a session. So once I came up with this kind of like, 3 clicks and I'm good. So light switch, tap the mouse to turn the computer on, and then turn on the sound card, and I'm really pretty much ready to roll at that point. That was pretty game changing because a lot of the when you get inspiration, it comes out of nowhere. So the ability to just jump out of bed, run in there, and capture what came to you within 5 minutes was super valuable to me. Uh, there are so many times before I had this setup where something would come to me, and just the thought of setting everything up, you know, bringing a laptop into the room, plugging in the sound, all this stuff, it would just deter your creativity. And
Too
so
much
I think
friction, right?
exactly. So the least amount of friction possible is has been worked wonders for me actually.
That's awesome. I think that's a good tip. What are some other areas, whether it's producing music or just living life in 2024, um, favorite technology? Are there any technology items that you're just like, a super fan of, or that a purchase you've made that has really changed your life or something? I look at what you do and you seem very technology inspired. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on cool technology right now.
A lot of what I use it's not old school, but it's blending old school methods with new tech. So a lot of the graphics that I do, I want to have some evidence that a human was involved in it. So rather than doing everything digitally, having some like hand drawn elements or designing something, printing it out on paper, and then rubbing it on the cement just to give it like an analog feel to it. So I'm always looking at ways to do that. So using an iPad with a pen, and then the process when I'm doing graphics is it involves a lot of different things. Some of it involves designing on a laptop, running it through the iPad, tracing over, drawing things by hand, sending that to my phone, running it through some phone apps, or through a digital analog distortion like VHS thing, um, printing things. So it's I like that process of blending old, classic methods with new stuff. But also, I hate even saying the word, but AI, where that's going, I'm actually all for it. I think it's exciting because the way I would use it is to help inspire new ideas. So not necessarily to type in a prompt, get an image, and that's your artwork or whatever you're going to do. But it's just to get you thinking differently, or to use elements of it, or to create a piece to a background in a photo shoot that you want to look a certain way. I mean, it's so useful. Um, and then eventually, like with the Apple Vision Pro headset, seeing where that can take you for music production. I don't think it's quite there yet, but that's pretty promising for design and music. Incorporating that all into one environment will be really cool for me.
Yeah, totally. Have you had a chance to play with an Apple Vision Pro yet?
I did, yeah. It's I feel like it's a few software updates away from what I would want to use it for. With as far as what I would need open in the view, but it's amazing. Just when you think of just in 10 years where this is going to go, it's going to be a different world.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to try it yet, but I've got a Quest 3
Mm.
and it's pretty impressive. So I'm excited at where that's going.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about, the Anix 2024. What's on the horizon here? You got a new album and maybe just
Mm.
a little tease of where that album is going. There's one song out currently, collaboration with Julian K. But yeah, talk about kind of what's in store for the year.
Yeah, so I've got a majority of the album is already pretty much done. It's like 90% there. Um, the reason I like this method we do at FiXT with releasing singles instead of the album all at once is you can evolve as you're going through the process. So as your taste changes over the course of a year, you can update, go back into the demos and refine things and change things. So just it gives you more time to fine tune that collection of songs in that mindset you're in. So yeah, Voltage is the album title. That's the theme, is more high energy electro based alternative rock. So it's not going to be any metal influence, but it's just a few notches up from I think the previous stuff. At least that's the goal at this point. So it's kind of looking back to when I first started, when I was still heavily into like the Deftones phase, but also into Depeche Mode and Nine Inch Nails and all that stuff, Prodigy, and just trying to capture that early inspiration. So working with Julian K on the first single, it was cool because that's also the world they came from, and their albums since their Julian K debuted have detoured from that. So both of us kind of went back to that original mindset of let's pretend like we're in 2005 and
Nice.
just go from there. So it was fun.
What about speaking of collaborations with Julian K? You've had a few previous ones. You've done a number of other collabs and remixes. Over the last 5 or 6 years, at least while you've been working with FiXT. Any favorite collabs or remixes that you've whether it was with a FiXT artist or you've done obviously some with external artists too.
Mhm.
But any favorite collabs?
Yeah, there's I always like doing anything with Cell Dweller because Clayton has such insane vocals. And when I do a remix, usually the only thing I retain is the vocal from the original track. So it anytime I'm doing something for him, it's fun and easy because you have such great source material. And then with Julian K, I work with those guys a lot because we have such a similar like background and brand DNA that it's kind of feels like you're in the same band at some point. They have they have their own way of thinking, which is different than mine. So it's
Yeah.
interesting the balance and kind of the battle of choosing certain melodies and technology. They do a lot of analog stuff still, like real amps, and that's the way their careers have gone. And I come from a slightly newer generation of that, so it's a fun back and forth we have.
Jumping around to some more music production, there was something that you did a YouTube video, an Instagram video about this Fender guitar, kind of bass guitar
Mhm.
that you're talking about, sometimes going outside the lines or the boundaries, and how the guitar store owner told you something not to do with it.
Yeah.
For those that haven't seen this video, which we should link that in the description of this. But the video you put together telling the story was great. But I'd love for you to share a little bit of that and just kind of what that video was.
Yeah, so I've had a relationship with Fender for a long time, and they've been super cool over the years, giving me some new gear to test. And the Bass 6 is an instrument that came out, I think it was late 50s, early 60s. And like the Beatles used it, and later on, The Cure used it, and some cool bands, Radiohead, a lot of experimental bands used it. But really, it's a six string instrument that kind of lies between a guitar and a bass. So you have the option if you want to run it through a guitar amp. And if you're playing higher up notes, you can kind of make it sound like a guitar, or you can kind of make it sound like a bass. So it's fun because it's based kind of on a Jaguar circuit. So you have all these switches to cut certain tones and EQ levels out of it. But it's an inspiring instrument because your hands just sit in a different place. You play things differently. You're not really playing chords because they're thick strings, but it has this just aggression about it. It's you hear more of the flap of the string because the way it's tuned. So it has this growl and grit to it that a guitar doesn't always have, or a bass. So it's really inspiring. So the song we did with Julian K was all you we used a bass 6 for all the guitar parts.
Oh, cool.
Originally I did the lead guitar parts on a normal guitar, and then Amir played them on his bass 6. And when those parts come in, it has a distinct like warmth about it that a guitar just can't do. So yeah, it's highly recommended. I've probably top 3 favorite things I have in the house. So
As far as guitars go, do you have a specific model that is your favorite, or your favorite models?
yeah, I've always loved the Jaguars and Jazzmaster, the offset body shape. Uh, Going back to one of the first things we talked about, like the 60s space age era, that's when that guitar really was born. So it always had a retro sci-fi like ray gun looking, you know, thing to it. And then growing up, all my favorite heroes were using that guitar. Gavin from Bush made the Jazz Master, Sonic Youth, um, Nirvana. So there's a number of heroes of mine that made that guitar an icon to me. And I always just liked, again, all the switches and pickup configurations and ways you can craft your own signature tone out of it, which a normal guitar just doesn't have. So, yeah.
Are there any dream collaborations that you have, artists that you like, modern artists that are still alive?
Mhm.
Any artists that you would be a dream collaboration to work with?
Yeah, Bush would be the absolute. I think I'd retire if I can do something to them, there'd just be no way to go any higher up than that. Um, Health is probably my favorite modern artist. So I did get a chance to work on a remix for them that may come out at some point. Um, and then Gesaffelstein is my other favorite. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Going back to, you've got a lot of just varied interests, music, technology, design, pop culture, fashion, like all these different things. Um, to round that out, you're also, I mean, especially if you follow your social media pages, you're also into cars and like car design.
Mhm.
Yeah, anything you would touch base on your interest in cars.
Yeah, that's when I think of like the building blocks that make who I am, it's, music, arts, automotive, car design, and fashion. Those are my favorite things on earth. So I've just always been car obsessed. I mentioned earlier I wanted to be a car designer originally before I dove into music. And while I was on tour in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, while I was on tour, I was always doing automotive design work in some capacity as like a side hustle because you have so much downtime on tour.
Oh yeah,
So I've always kind of had a foot in doing that kind of stuff. And, I've done countless automotive merchandise designs and logo designs and concepts, all kinds of things throughout the years. So it's definitely a core part of who I am. So yeah, I in my personal life, the first thing I like to do when I get up is go drive, just to kind of have time without looking at the phone, where you're not interrupted. Driving's For most people, driving's something they want to avoid. It's one of their worst parts of life. Is, oh God, I have to go drive. You know,
yeah,
wherever. For me, that's one of the best parts. Something I look forward to is, wherever the in destination is doesn't matter. It's the fact that I get to drive to that destination. So I just love everything about cars and the design of it. I think cars are one of the most futuristic things we have on Earth.
yeah.
When you think of what it takes to make a car, it's very similar to human anatomy. You have a brain, a nervous system, components that move like bones. So I think it's a real miracle that cars even exist. So
Any favorite car brands, car designs?
uh, the era that I loved was the wedge shaped design of the supercars of the 80s. So when you think
Mm,
of like the DeLorean, the BMW M1, um, Panteras from before that, uh, some of the early like Supras, 300ZX, Japanese cars, that kind of stuff is seems to be kind of making a comeback now. So I'm excited to see if that where that ends up landing. But personally, I have a BMW M2. I've always liked the M cars, mainly because the wide body and the enhancements you see compared to the normal series production car. So it's kind of like the mutated monster Incredible Hulk version of the normal car. So yeah, just I love everything about it.
awesome. Um, if you had to give any advice to an aspiring artist, musician, starting out or early in the process, based on what you've learned and how things have evolved, any words of wisdom or encouragement?
I get fans emailing me a lot about that, like where do they start? And I think if you have to ask, where do I start? It might not be for you because it requires so much of you to do it that you kind of have to have some calling that's beyond anything you understand that's making you do it, um, which will lead you to the path to figure it out. So if you have that in you, you'll just take the plunge, buy a guitar, or download software on your laptop and figure out how to start making noise if you want it bad enough, if it's calling you that much. So I think I do meet a lot of fans that want to rush through that process, and that's a short term mindset because it's a pretty unrewarding business to be in. So you really have to enjoy the act of building and designing, and the whole aspect of just doing it for yourself has to be the first part of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, there can be a million excuses of getting in the way of doing stuff, but if you're really inspired, you will find a way and create.
definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. If you're inspired enough, then there's nothing that'll block you from doing it. There's free software. There's really no barricade. You just have to take the initial plunge of, even if you don't know anything about music and you want to start, and you have this like burning, insane desire to start it, download the software, even if you know nothing about it, and just start pressing buttons. You're not going to break anything. You have to just take the initial step to start. And that's it.
Yeah. It will To kind of wrap up a little bit here, a couple final questions. Um, as far as fan interaction, has there been any stories that come to mind with a story a fan gave you about what your music meant to them? Anything that really, made you step back and go like, oh, this is making a difference in people's lives, and or something that really resonated with you? Any stories that come to mind that you would share?
Yeah, there's been way more times than I can even keep track. And I don't know if it's the melancholic style music I make, but there's a lot of people that say that it's somehow they've been one step away from ending their life, and somehow, in some way I don't understand, my music has prevented that from happening. And that's a reoccurring message that I'll get from different people across the world. So that's pretty impactful when you think of, why are you spending so much time devoted to music that's so unrewarding, that's so hard, everything's against you, and then you get one of those messages and you're like, oh, maybe that's the reason. So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah, I can attest to that too. Like, you know, melancholy music, or sometimes the more dark and aggressive stuff ends up being very cathartic to me, to feel like I'm not alone. I'm not the only one feeling these feelings, and it actually makes me feel better.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I want to thank you and acknowledge you for putting your art out there, and the lyrics and the messages that you put and what you're going through, and it does impact people. I've seen it, and so yeah, I appreciate you for putting your art out there despite all of the obstacles and hurdles that happen.
Thanks, man.
Um, any closing message or anything you'd like to leave with, just for fans of the Anix that might watch, or Fixed? Anything you'd like to leave with?
Just that, being an artist, any interaction we get from fans, like comments or reposts or any of that stuff, at least for me, I see all of it and acknowledge all of it. And I know that takes a lot for someone to want to repost something or even just like something. Just when I think about how I interact with social media, where I'm rarely even hitting the like or reposting anything. So just want to appreciate anyone that does that, because all that stuff does help motivate all artists, not only on Fix, but just in general. These are little building blocks that helps kind of keep the train rolling. So yeah, any little interaction like that is cool.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for again putting your art out there into the world, for taking some time to chat, and anyone watching this that hasn't dove into the Annex yet, there's a whole catalog of music to discover, and more music coming. So Voltage will be out later this year, and yeah, thanks, Brandon.
Cool. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.